Some brands fade away so quietly, you barely notice. Others disappear, and suddenly you realize an entire era is gone. There was once a video rental chain with more than 9,000 stores around the world. There was once a phone so popular with executives, Wall Street bankers, and government officials that owning one felt like a status symbol. And there was once an airline whose Blue Globe logo practically meant international travel. At their peak, these weren't just successful companies. They felt untouchable. They dominated their industries. They became part of everyday life. So how does a brand that seems too big to fail simply disappear? Today, we're counting down 10 brands that were once everywhere, until they vanished from the mainstream, shut down, or became shadows of what they used to be. Some are completely gone. Others technically still exist in some form, but the empire they once ruled is long dead. And as we go through this list, you'll notice a pattern. Most of these companies didn't suddenly become terrible. The world changed, and they didn't change fast enough. Number 10, GeoCities. If you grew up in the age of Instagram, TikTok, and smartphones, it may be hard to imagine this. There was a time when having your own place on the internet meant actually building your own website. And in the 1990s, one of the biggest places to do that was GeoCities. GeoCities gave ordinary people a way to create their own personal homepages. You could upload photos, add animated GIFs, play music automatically, use blinking text, install a visitor counter, and choose a background so bright and chaotic it could practically damage your eyesight. By modern standards, most GeoCities pages looked terrible. But back then, they felt incredible. Because for the first time, regular people could say, "This is my space on the internet." In 1999, Yahoo acquired GeoCities in a multi-billion-dollar deal. At the time, it looked like GeoCities had officially become part of the internet establishment. But then the internet changed. People stopped wanting to build isolated personal websites from scratch. Blogs became popular. Then MySpace. Then Facebook. Users no longer wanted their own tiny island on the web. They wanted to be where everybody else already was. In 2009, Yahoo shut down the main GeoCities service. Millions of personal websites filled with pure 1990s internet culture disappeared. GeoCities wasn't defeated by a better version of GeoCities. It was defeated because the way people used the internet was completely reinvented. Number 9, Circuit City. Before Amazon became the default place to buy almost anything, Americans looking for TVs, computers, speakers, DVD players, and other electronics often went to one place, Circuit City. Huge red signs, massive stores, walls filled with televisions. For American shoppers in the 1990s and early 2000s, Circuit City was one of the biggest names in consumer electronics. At one point, it was one of the largest electronics retailers in the country. But Circuit City made a dangerous mistake. It underestimated how quickly retail was changing. Best Buy expanded aggressively. Walmart sold more electronics. And then online shopping gave customers something brick-and-mortar stores had never faced before: instant price comparison. Suddenly, you didn't need to drive to a giant store and talk to a salesperson just to figure out which television to buy. You could sit at home, compare prices, read reviews, and place an order in minutes. Circuit City was still carrying the enormous cost of physical stores, employees, inventory, and real estate. Meanwhile, the shopping experience was moving online. In 2008, Circuit City filed for bankruptcy. By 2009, its remaining US stores had closed. A company that once sold Americans the latest technology was ultimately destroyed by the future it helped introduce them to. Number 8, Borders. This next one probably hurts a little if you love bookstores. Borders. At one point, walking into Borders wasn't just about buying a book. You could spend an entire afternoon there. Browse novels, flip through magazines, listen to CDs, grab a coffee, hang around without feeling rushed. Before online shopping fully took over, giant bookstores were destinations, and Borders was one of the biggest. But then the company made a decision that looks almost unbelievable in hindsight. In 2001, Borders handed over much of its online book-selling operation to another company. That company was Amazon. At the time, the logic made sense. Borders was good at physical bookstores. Amazon was good at e-commerce. Why not let each company focus on what it did best? The problem was that e-commerce was about to become the future. While Amazon was building one of the most powerful online retail businesses in history, Borders had effectively outsourced a major part of its digital strategy. Then came e-readers, Kindle, digital books. Another fundamental shift in how people bought and consumed books. Borders was still carrying the cost of enormous stores, inventory, and leases. What had once been its biggest advantage became a liability. In 2011, Borders entered bankruptcy and began liquidating its remaining stores. A company built around books failed to make it to the next chapter. Number 7. Saturn. In the 1980s, American automakers were facing a major problem. Japanese brands were taking market share. Their cars were efficient, reliable, and increasingly popular with American buyers. General Motors decided it needed a different kind of response. Not just a new car, a completely new brand. Saturn. Saturn was supposed to represent a new kind of American auto company, new factories, a new corporate culture, a different relationship with dealers. Even no haggle pricing. The message was clear. This was not the old General Motors. Saturn was supposed to be something completely different. And for a while, it worked. Saturn built an unusually loyal customer base. Owners loved the brand. Some even drove across the country to attend massive company-sponsored reunions at the Saturn plant in Tennessee. But over time, the problem became obvious. Keeping Saturn truly different required enormous investment. Eventually, GM began sharing more platforms and vehicles across its brands. And the more Saturn became integrated into the larger GM system, the less unique it felt. The brand created to be different slowly stopped being different. Then came the financial crisis. General Motors entered a fight for survival. And suddenly, the company had to decide which brands were worth saving. Saturn didn't make the cut. A potential sale collapsed. And by 2010, Saturn was finished. The brand that had once been created to represent GM's future became one of the brands GM had to kill in order to have a future. Number 6, Netscape. Today, if you open the internet, you probably use Chrome, Safari, Edge, or Firefox. But in the mid-1990s, one browser practically defined what it meant to go online: Netscape Navigator. During the early explosion of the World Wide Web, Netscape grew incredibly fast. For millions of early internet users, that giant letter N was their doorway to the web. And for a while, Netscape looked unstoppable. Then Microsoft noticed. Microsoft had something Netscape didn't: Windows. Internet Explorer began coming directly with Windows computers. And that created a simple problem. If your new computer already had a web browser installed, why would the average person go out of their way to download Netscape? Most people wouldn't. The competition became known as the first browser war, and Netscape's market share collapsed. In 1999, AOL acquired the company. But by then, the browser that had once dominated the web was already losing its relevance. Support for Netscape Navigator officially ended in 2008. But Netscape left behind an important legacy. Its technology and open source efforts helped contribute to the Mozilla project. And Mozilla eventually gave us Firefox. So Netscape disappeared as a brand. But part of its DNA survived. Number 5, Pontiac. If you love classic American performance cars, Pontiac needs almost no introduction. The GTO, the Firebird, the Trans Am. These weren't just cars. They represented an entire piece of American car culture. Horsepower, attitude, rebellion. Pontiac became deeply connected to movies, television, and the image of American muscle. But by the 2000s, Pontiac had a major problem. Its identity was getting blurry. General Motors had too many brands competing for attention and resources. Every brand needed new products, marketing, dealerships, and investment. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit. General Motors itself was in serious trouble. The company had to make brutal decisions. Which brands were essential? Which ones could be saved? And which ones had to die? Pontiac was not chosen to survive. GM announced that the brand would be phased out. By 2010, after more than 80 years, Pontiac was gone from new car showrooms. A name that once helped define the golden age of American performance simply disappeared from the market. Number 4, TWA. Today, when Americans think of major airlines, they usually think of names like American, Delta, or United. But decades ago, 3 other letters carried enormous weight: TWA, Trans World Airlines. At its peak, TWA was one of the most famous airlines in America. During the golden age of jet travel, it flew passengers around the world. Its planes, uniforms, terminals, and advertising captured the glamorous image people once associated with flying. But the airline industry is brutal. Fuel is expensive. Aircraft are expensive. Maintenance is expensive. Labor is expensive. And after airline deregulation in the United States, competition became even more intense. TWA struggled with debt and financial instability for years. The brand was still famous, but the company behind it was getting weaker. It went through multiple bankruptcy restructurings, and in 2001, TWA filed for Chapter 11 again. American Airlines acquired most of its assets. Some of the planes kept flying. Some employees moved over. But the TWA name slowly disappeared from airports. 3 letters that once represented global travel became aviation history. Number 3, BlackBerry. Before the iPhone, if you were important, there was a good chance you carried a BlackBerry. Executives loved it. Bankers loved it. Government officials loved it. It had a physical keyboard that people could type on incredibly fast. Email arrived almost instantly. And in an era before modern smartphones, it felt like having your office in your pocket. People were so addicted to checking their BlackBerries that the nickname Crackberry became popular. At its peak, BlackBerry looked like it owned the future of mobile communication. Then came 2007, the iPhone. At first, not everyone saw the threat. No physical keyboard? Business users would never go for that. At least, that was the assumption. But Apple wasn't just changing the keyboard. It was changing the definition of a phone. A smartphone was no longer just a device for email, calls, and text messages. It became a pocket computer. Then came the App Store. Android followed. Entire ecosystems grew around touchscreens and mobile apps. BlackBerry spent too much time protecting the things that had made it successful: its keyboard, its enterprise reputation, its traditional operating system. By the time the company seriously tried to catch up, the market had already moved on. BlackBerry still exists today as a company, with its business focused largely on software and cybersecurity. But the BlackBerry phone empire, the one that once dominated offices and boardrooms, is gone. In 2022, many legacy BlackBerry devices lost access to the old services that had kept them functioning. One of the pioneers of the smartphone era was eventually overtaken by the future it helped create. Number 2, Pan Am. If there was ever one brand that represented the idea that flying could be glamorous, luxurious, and exciting, it was Pan Am. Pan American World Airways, the white aircraft, the blue globe logo, the flight attendants, the international destinations. At its peak, Pan Am wasn't just an airline. It was one of the most powerful symbols of American international travel. The company pioneered major international routes and helped define the jet age. Its name appeared constantly in movies, advertisements, magazines, and pop culture. If you picture glamorous international travel in the 1960s, there's a good chance the airplane in your imagination has a Pan Am logo on it. But a massive international airline also comes with massive costs. Oil shocks hurt the industry. Deregulation increased competition. Debt became a serious problem, and a series of crises weakened the company even further. To survive, Pan Am began selling off valuable routes and assets. But that created another problem. If an airline sells the most valuable pieces of its business just to stay alive, what exactly is left to rebuild with? On December 4th, 1991, Pan Am stopped flying. After more than 6 decades, one of the most legendary names in aviation was grounded for good. And strangely, that only made the brand more iconic. Some companies disappear and are quickly forgotten. Pan Am disappeared and became a legend. Number 1, Blockbuster. But if there's one brand that perfectly represents the phrase, once everywhere, then suddenly gone, it has to be Blockbuster. Friday night. You and your family or friends walk into a Blockbuster. Rows and rows of VHS tapes. Later, DVDs. You pick up a movie, read the back, put it down, walk around for 20 minutes, pick another one, change your mind again, and somehow spend half an hour choosing a movie you could have watched in 2. For an entire generation of Americans, that was the weekend. At its peak around 2004, Blockbuster had more than 9,000 stores worldwide. Think about that. Blockbuster wasn't just a video rental company. For millions of people, Blockbuster was how you watched movies at home. But here was the problem. Customers never actually wanted to visit a video store. What they wanted was easy access to movies. The store was just the best technology available at the time. Then DVD by mail services appeared. That was the first warning. Then streaming became practical, and everything changed. Before, you had to drive to the store, find a movie, wait in line, rent it, remember to return it. And if you forgot, late fees. Streaming removed almost every piece of friction. Turn on the TV, click a button, start watching. Suddenly, Blockbuster's greatest advantage, thousands of physical locations, became its greatest weakness. The rent still had to be paid. Employees still had to be paid. Inventory still had to be managed. But customers no longer needed to come inside. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. By 2014, the last company-owned stores had closed. Today, one famous Blockbuster location still survives in Bend, Oregon. And it's become something closer to a nostalgia destination than a normal video rental business. People visit because they want to experience something that used to be completely ordinary, but now feels like stepping into another time. And that may be the most fascinating part of the Blockbuster story. Blockbuster wasn't completely unaware of the internet. It wasn't incapable of trying new things. The real problem was that it didn't change fast enough. When a business model has made you billions of dollars for decades, one of the hardest things in business is accepting that you may need to destroy your own successful model before someone else does it for you. Blockbuster couldn't make that transition fast enough. Netflix did. And today, one is mostly a symbol of nostalgia. The other helped completely change how the world watches entertainment. They came from completely different industries. But when you put all 10 stories together, the pattern starts to become obvious. Success can sometimes make a company more vulnerable. Because when your current business model is making billions of dollars, the last thing you want to believe is that the model itself may be dying. Blockbuster wasn't defeated only by Netflix. Borders wasn't defeated only by Amazon. BlackBerry wasn't defeated only by the iPhone. What really defeated these companies was something much bigger. Their customers moved into the next era, while they were still betting on the previous one. So the next time you see a company that seems too big, too famous, or too powerful to ever disappear, remember these names. Because in business, almost nothing lasts forever. The only question is, who disappears next?